Jovan, Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to another Lakers postgame reaction show. Just got back from the American Airlines Center where the Lakers fell 118-97 to the Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving-less Mavericks. LA drops to 20-16. They are now tied for sixth in the West with the LA Clippers. They are 8-11 on the road, and they wrap up this Texas road trip 0-2. What is up, everyone in the chat? I see you all starting to populate. Let me know if you can hear me okay. I seemed like it was a little laggy to start. Just want to make sure my connection's okay. But yeah, I mean, I see it in the chat already, and I am pretty much agreeing with everyone. Like, this is in the conversation for worst loss of the season. I would still point to the Miami loss as the worst loss of the season, the low point of the season, the way that the Lakers rolled over in that third quarter. I think that was as bad as it's been really in the LeBron AD era. I think that's in the conversation for worst loss of the LeBron AD era. But outside of that aberration of the team basically openly quitting, I mean, this is right there. Like, I was going through the schedule, and like, you know, Cleveland, they got waxed. The game in Cleveland, Detroit was a pretty bad loss. The Orlando game, of course, missing free throws down the stretch. The Denver game getting rolled in the second half. The Phoenix game similarly getting rolled in the second half. Then you got Minnesota and Miami back-to-back 71-point losses combined. And then more recently, I think the Houston first half was awful. But yeah, I mean, this is right there with any of those other ones. Just from a personnel standpoint, in terms of actually like losing to a team and basing it off of what that team, like the caliber of talent that team had. Like, I give Dallas credit. They played a really good game. And as LeBron said after the game, they did a really good job of exploiting the Lakers defense and targeting guys and spreading them out and then just taking them off the dribble. And the Lakers help rotations were often late or non-existent. But in terms of like quality of opponent, I would say this is arguably their worst loss of the season. And certainly, again, it's hard to say it's more embarrassing than the Miami loss. But the fact that we're even having this conversation, it speaks to a consistent unseriousness with this group that, you know, they just vacillate wildly game to game. And they go through these little stretches where they look really good. And then they have this Texas trip where they have one of their worst halves of the season in Houston. And then they make the comeback, but it's not enough because of how bad that first half was. And then this game, it's almost the inverse, where they are up 50-44 late in the first half. From that point on, they get outscored 74-47, and just get absolutely blitzed by Dallas over the final about 27 minutes or so of the game. So a lot to touch on. I'm going to try not to focus too much on the game because I think you all watched it. You all have your reactions to it, and I'd rather just get into the Q&A quickly. Before we get started, though, two things. First, and most importantly, thoughts and prayers go out to those affected by the Palisades fires right now. It was a big talking point around the team before and after the game. And so for anyone that is in LA right now, I hope you all are safe and you don't have to evacuate, and the fires ultimately don't affect you and your family and friends and loved ones. But if they do, you know, my thoughts and prayers are with you. So that's the most important thing. And I've been checking on my people at home. We're not too close to it, but about 20-25 minutes. So you never know with the winds and how things could jump. So wanted to open with that. And then no easy transition into this, but you guys know the drill before we get started. those on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on channel notifications, and make sure you like and comment on this video. And then for those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. Okay, so let's get into it. The overarching takeaway for me from tonight's game is just, I kind of spoiled it, but this was a horrible loss. This was a bad loss. That there's really no other way to spin this. Again, I think it's in the conversation for worst loss of the season or worst non-Miami loss of the season. And this was a costly loss for the Lakers, because had they won, they would have jumped the Mavericks in the standings and had started to establish some cushion there, especially with, like, they're on a 5-game losing streak. No Luka, no Kyrie. Those guys are going to be out for a bit. And LA had an opportunity to make up some ground with a team that they're currently battling with. And I do expect them to eventually pass Dallas and for at least, the next month or so be ahead of them. But this could be the type of loss that ultimately, when it comes to like the season series or jockeying in the standings, this could be a costly loss for the Lakers down the road. And again, just with the lack of seriousness with the first half of the Houston game, AD called this game a must win, and to have your best player call a game a must win and then come out and lay an egg for the final 27 minutes of already was not like a great start by the Lakers, but it was fine. They were, the Mavericks are pesky, that they are, especially without Luka and Kyrie. I would argue that they're better defensively because they have these athletic wings that, can switch and keep the ball in front of them. So, like, in a way, I think they're certainly better defensively. Obviously, offensively, you're losing to, I think Luka's the second or third best player in the league. I think Kyrie is an all-star level player. So you're losing to top 30 guys, right? So you're going to be worse. And again, they were on a 5-game losing streak, and there's just no excuse to not only lose, but to lose by 21 and have it snowball the way that it did. It's again, I just rattled off how many losses that we could put in contention for like worst loss of the season. The Lakers continue to have a lot of close wins and a lot of bad losses. And that is why they have that negative net rating, that negative point differential. When they lose, it's pretty ugly, and it tends to get out of control. And it's just that there's like a level of momentum that goes against them that they can't really rally against. And, the Houston game was an exception in terms of making that type of comeback, but they have several other games where it's just ballooned. And I think they did show some more resilience in that game, but this is just a bad loss. There's really no other way to spin it. Stat of the night for me, I'm going to hit on the rebounding, because I thought that was a sneaky big part of this. You could hit on the 3-point shooting. They had a +7 margin, which translated to 21 more points at the 3-point line. They were +12 in the paint, they being Dallas. But to me, Dallas out rebounding them by 11, having 11 offensive rebounds, leading to 15 second chance points. Like there was no Steven Adams in this one. There was no Amin Thompson in this one, skying from 10 feet away and just out, athleticing people. It's not even a word, but like there was none of that, right? Like they certainly had some advantages with looking at the offensive rebounds. Like Najee Marshall had 3, Derek Lively had a couple, but really looking at it, they played 9 rotation guys, and 8 of the 9 had at least 1 offensive rebound. So it was really by committee that they were able to take advantage of the Lakers and just beat them to loose balls. And felt LA just didn't have the requisite energy and came out pretty flat, particularly when it came to defensive rebounding. And how many times did Dallas get an offensive rebound and then kick it out for 3? And it just felt like they had so many back-breaking plays and momentum plays where LA did eventually in the second half cut it to 5 in the third quarter. Then they respond with 4 straight threes to just bury the Lakers. And from that point on, I think LA got within like 8 again, but that was as close as they got the rest of the way. So just a bad loss. And again, stat of the night to me, I thought that the +6 margin on the offensive glass, the +11 overall, on the glass and +8 in second chance points. Like that stuff matters. And that's an area that the Lakers can control. It is somewhat effort based and somewhat scheme based. And the fact that they continue to lose that, especially to a team that on paper isn't, I would not say this is like a much bigger team than them, if even a bigger team, that they certainly have some big wings, but this was not a team that should have out physicaled, another word I'm making up, the Lakers the way that they did tonight. And they just kicked their butt. So takeaway number one is going to be first look at the rotation with Gabe. We had not seen that. And based on the way that JJ ran the rotation, you had your 5 starters, which we will touch on in a second. DFS as the 6th man, Gabe as the 7th man, Dalton as the 8th man, Jackson as the 9th man. Went with a 9-man rotation. Shake was a DNP CD. I think Gabe had a rough game. I think you could say that about a lot of Lakers. He went 0 for 4. Another game where he plays over 20 minutes, has a really rough shooting night. Goes scoreless. I think he's an upgrade over Shake, particularly on the defensive end, but he continues to have such a low floor that it really makes it hard for you to trust Gabe. And first game back from an injury, I think he gets a bit of a pass, in my opinion, just because anytime a guy misses several games, like sometimes there's some rust. It takes you a little bit to get acclimated, but this isn't a one-off situation with Gabe either. This is something we've continually seen with him. So for tonight's game, I will give him benefit of the doubt. He had been shooting the ball much better, obviously, over the last few weeks, but still, the floor with him continues to be very low, which is really a trend within this rotation. Overall, I thought the rotation made sense. There were some stretches that I didn't really get. Like there was one stretch when I think Rui or LeBron should probably be on the floor at all times and keeping the front court with a certain level of size. I didn't get closing with Gabe with like 3 minutes left, and they benched DFS, and I didn't really get that. Like I thought Gabe got lit up defensively. He was guarding Jaden Hardy when Jaden Hardy went off for 3 straight threes. So overall, first look at the rotation, it kind of went as I expected. It's going to largely be the starters plus DFS and Gabe. And then after that, it's going to come down to like Howard, Dalton, and Jackson playing. Jackson had a rough go. He had 4 fouls in less than 4 minutes and had a couple blocks, but he just got pretty much dominated by their bench. And then takeaway number 2 for me is arguably the biggest one coming out of this game, which is it's time to start DFS. We have a 5-game sample. It's just clear that DFS is better than Rui. He's a better fit than Rui with the starters. And I think it's time for DFS to replace Rui in the starting lineup. So through the last 5 games, which are the 5 games that DFS has been on the team, Rui's averaging 9 points a game on 48.7% shooting, which is good, but only 22.2% 3-point shooting, 47.4% free throw shooting. That's awful, in 26.4 minutes per game. DFS, on the other hand, 7.4 points per game, so a little bit less, but he's also not going to be as involved offensively, but 46.4% shooting, 42.1% 3-point shooting, and that's the key there, that 20% difference, and that's not going to hold up right over the course of the season, but DFS has come in and shot the way that he was shooting in Brooklyn. Rui has regressed a little bit. This has been a rough patch for him, but just looking at it over the stretch, DFS leads the team in plus minus. Lakers are plus 27 in his 122 minutes. Rui is among the I think he's like third lowest on the team at minus 14 in 132 minutes. So that's a 41-point swing there between those two. And the starters with DFS in Rui's place are now plus 17 in 16 minutes. So it is a small sample size, but if you look at just the way that these two guys are playing, the way that they're fitting in, DFS has been, like, forget the offensive end, he's just been such a better defender than Rui. And like Rui made several big defensive mistakes on the weak side tonight as the low man, but also botching switches off the ball. And like, there's just a level of seriousness that, and just big game experience and professionalism that DFS plays with. Guys have talked about how he communicates well on the defensive end. He said he could have done a better job tonight, but JJ's pointed that out. Multiple players have pointed that out, that, this is not, I mean, JJ even said it. He's like, this is not a chatty group. This is a group that can go stretches being quiet on the floor, and DFS brings a certain level of just communication and energy. And I think it's time to slightly reduce Rui's role. I also think if you move him to the bench, you could potentially get more out of him offensively. Because right now the Lakers, Dalton gave him a boost with 13 points off the bench. DFS had 11, but the bench has continually been outscored by opposing benches basically nightly. And I just think Dorian, the minutes were higher than Rui's tonight. He played about almost 3 more minutes than him, and that's a positive trend. But I just think it's pretty clear that he's the better player. He's the better fit. He should be starting, and he should be closing over him. And I think it's time to, similar to D'Lo, what they did earlier in the season, I think it's time to scale down Rui's role a little bit and scale down the resilience on him, the reliance on him. Just because I he had 2 rebounds the entire Texas trip. Think about, he had 1 rebound against Dallas, 1 rebound against Houston. That's crazy, right? So I know this is, I don't want to just cherry pick a bad Rui stretch, though I would argue that he's had a few of these stretches throughout the season. But just when it comes down to what the Lakers need, I think they need a little bit more energy and defensive versatility. I think Dorian Finney-Smith is a better connecting piece than Rui in terms of moving the ball. He's a quick shooter, and I think he's shown the ability to attack closeouts and just fit relatively well. He's a plug-and-play player, and I think we have a 5-game sample now. I think Rui makes more sense off the bench. I think it's been trending that way based on both the Houston and Dallas game, and I would not be surprised if this happens potentially as soon as Thursday. I'm not reporting anything, to be clear, but whether it's Thursday or at some point in the next few games, I think this is trending toward DFS eventually starting as the 5th starter and not being the Lakers' best path forward until they potentially make another move. And then final takeaway before we get into the Q&A, it's going to be, we got another Jarred Vanderbilt update. So JJ said that yesterday, Vando participated in 5-on-5 action with Lakers coaches. So that was his first time taking part in that. The next step is going to be ramping up to actually practicing and taking part in 5-on-5 scrimmaging and contact with teammates and actual NBA players and not just coaches and player development guys and whatnot. And then the Lakers said that he is ramping up and he's going to be reevaluated in another week. So I think with all this sort of up and down play, particularly on both sides of the ball, I think adding a guy like Vando, it just gives you another option if you're the Lakers in terms of, especially if you start Dorian, move Rui to the bench, then you could play with the matchups a little bit. And there's going to be some games where maybe Rui's got it going. He's shooting the ball well. He's active. He's engaged. And you play Rui a little bit more off the bench. There's going to be games where maybe Vando's needed more. And JJ did say he's going to ease him in. So that's one thing to note. He's probably going to start playing 10 minutes a game when he comes back, and then ramp up to 15 and then ramp up to 20. So it's going to be a bit of a process of them easing him in. But I think that makes more sense and just gives the Lakers another look. And they really could have used that skill set tonight against this Dallas team, guarding a PJ Washington, guarding Quentin Grimes, even Jaden Hardy. They really could have used Vando in this matchup. So I think that's a sign of optimism. Doesn't mean he's going to be back in a week, but we will have an update in a week, and potentially, it's looking like he could be back relatively soon, and maybe by a little bit past the midway point of the month. So I think that's the most positive thing to come out of tonight's media sessions for the Lakers. But with all that said, let's get into the Q&A. I see we got a few super chats here. First one from Gabriel. Rui, Gabe Vincent, JHS, and any draft capital for Miles Turner and Aaron Nesmith. Celtics traded smart for an impact player regardless of how much the city loved him. So I think you're implying here that Rui is the player that the city loves, and that the Lakers should trade him. I would do that if I'm the Lakers. I've talked about how I think Miles Turner is as close to like a lab grown big, like big compliment next to AD as a player can be. I mean, you could throw Kristaps Porzingis in there, Brook Lopez. Like there's several guys, but I think Turner and Porzingis are a little bit more mobile, and I just really like the offensive fit next to AD and the defensive complementing and just sort of supercharging what AD can do. And you could play those two guys next to each other. You could also have either one out there as the lone center. And then Aaron Nesmith, I really like as well. He's got size, shooting. So yeah, I would do that. I don't know exactly what the cost would be. I would assume that Indiana would probably ask for both picks in that scenario. But if you're the Lakers, I think that's a trade where you upgrade the center spot and you get another big wing. And sort of replace that. Like you're losing Rui, but you're replacing that with Nesmith. So I like that move. I like it. D Bonner, yes. So one part of it says Reeves got absolutely destroyed defensively. Mavs kept hunting him. So there's a lot of parts of this game that I could get into that I just there's a lot of like negative stuff, and I kind of wanted to just get into the Q&A. But certainly, Austin had maybe his worst defensive game of the season. I would really have to go back and think about it, but the Mavs were ruthlessly targeting him. Thought it was better in the second half, and he said that after the game that he felt like he was awful in the first half on both sides of the ball, and that he started to kind of find his rhythm more in the second half, and he felt his defense was better, which I would agree with. But still, I someone sent me a screenshot of the possessions, and it said that Austin was targeted 15 times in isolation, and that was the most times he's been targeted in a game this season. And I think it went beyond Austin. I thought Rui was targeted a bit. Gabe was targeted a bit. Guys were able to just shoot over him. Who else was? I mean, Dalton was another glaring target for them. And, there was a few times he got scored on, but I think it was the worst with Austin. And I also point to, though, like, I thought the Lakers' help defense tonight was abysmal. So it wasn't just like guys were able to ISO Austin and get by him, but that's why you have 4 other guys on the court to hopefully help you. And he did a bad job, especially in the first half, of being a point of attack guy and just stopping the ball. But I also thought the backline rotations were pretty bad. So, like, one thing that was kind of wild that JJ said after the game was that there were stretches of the game where the Lakers were running coverages that he had never seen before. And I guess it would have been nice to have had some follow-up clarity as to, like, when he says never seen before, is that like never seen before in his basketball career, or like never seen before with this group, or like, but he certainly made it clear that like it was coverages that they were not telling the team to run, and that they were kind of like doing their own thing out there and just really not running like base level stuff that the team has implemented. So certainly some element of like disconnect there between the players and the coaching staff tonight in terms of the defense and how they wanted it to be run. But you are certainly right. Like, there's no, Austin had a really rough go defensively. Angelco Azorad Rezo trade AD. So AD had 21 points, 12 rebounds, and 2 blocks, but he was just 7 for 18 from the floor. And I would assume had like 5 point blank shots that he missed tonight, that he is typically a good finisher. Though when he's not playing well, the finishing is part of his game that starts to go. I'm not there. I understand the frustration, but if you're trading AD, you're basically rebuilding and punting on the season. So if that's how you feel, then that's you're entitled to that. I'm not anywhere close to there. BLC, how do you solve mental issue with underestimating teams? So one thing I will note with this is that the Lakers have actually been pretty good against teams under 500. So if you look at it They are 13-2 on the season against teams below 500. So they've largely taken care of business against the bad teams. Like if we go back and look at the losses I was saying were some of the worst of the season, they were for the most part against good teams. Like Cleveland, arguably the best team in the league or top three. Detroit is an exception. That's really been a matchup issue for them, but Orlando's a good team. Denver's a good team. Phoenix was a good team before their season fell apart. Minnesota has been up and down, but at home, that was a tough one. And then Miami, I've always talking myself out of my own point. Some of the losses have been to good teams. Some of them have been to like mediocre teams, but none of these teams, it's not like they lost to like Brooklyn or Washington or Charlotte, or when they play Charlotte on Thursday, we'll see. But for the most part, it's not like, they haven't lost to bottom dwellers. Like they didn't lose to Toronto. They didn't lose to Utah. They didn't lose to New Orleans. So Portland, like they've taken care of business against the bad teams. This to me was a combination of they haven't been good on the road. And I think there was probably some carryover from the Houston game. They did just look tired. That was something that JJ said. I don't excuse it because that's just part of the NBA season. You're going to look tired. You got to figure it out. But it was just one of those nights. Like I don't want to overreact too much to this game, to be honest. But I think it does speak to your point. Like I don't think it's a mental issue with underestimating teams so far as like more of like a focus issue for this group, that they can just go through periods where they're not focused, they're unserious, and it really compounds into some bad basketball. And I think their floor sometimes is just lower than it should be. Like this should have been, even if it was a close game and they won, this should have been a game they won. They should not have lost by 20. Angelico Azorad Rezo again, thank you for the super chat. 80 is soft. AR can't play defense. Rui can't score. Time for wholesale changes. So you are ready to burn it all down. I do appreciate the super chat. I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet. This has like they lose to Charlotte, then the pitchforks can start to come back out. But I'm not there yet. Tony Tong, thank you for the super chat. Effort was poor, but the lack of coaching adjustment and 80 post-up focus on offense in the past two games instead of Reeves or Braun point of attack is concerning. Yes, I would point to that. Like I thought, LeBron sometimes can let you know how he feels without explicitly saying it. And the first thing that was asked to him was like a night like tonight, do you just tip your hat to them and give them credit for how they played offensively without Luka and Kyrie? Or do you look at the defense and really point to like your guys' mistakes? And he credited Dallas and said they just did a really good job of attacking the way that the Lakers play. And he was like, they clearly watch how we defend and they made a game plan to attack that. And he's, of course, good relationship with Jason Kidd, played together Team USA, but also was an assistant on the 2020 title team. So I think when LeBron has a good relationship with the coach, he typically will go out of his way to compliment them. But I also thought there was kind of an element of almost criticizing the game plan. And I thought tonight, like they did mix it up later in the game. Like JJ mentioned, kind of going to a different style of defense over the final like 7-8 minutes of the game. But I felt it was too late. And this has been, when we go back to some of the previous bad losses, a trend in them has been at times teams being able to exploit the Lakers' weaker perimeter defenders or target just certain guys and continue to spam those actions. And I thought that's what really happened tonight with, again, it wasn't just Austin. I think Austin was the guy who's targeted the most and who stood out the most, but it was Dalton, it was Gabe, it was Rui, and Jackson too, in terms of attacking him in the paint. So I think that the Lakers need to, I thought they just switched too much tonight and they kind of went back to some of the lazy switching, or the, maybe lazy is the wrong word, but the passive switching where they almost go on like autopilot and they're just kind of passing each matchup off. And sometimes like when you play like that, you like, this is a team that loves to ISO. This is a team that has guys who can attack off the dribble and get an ISO bucket. And at times it almost became like AAU ball, I felt like, and it just became, okay, who has the best matchup, or like, how can we put player X or defender X in a certain spot on the floor, and we're just going to attack that guy. And then I think the Lakers did a really poor job of rotating, or if they did rotate, then their second and third efforts within the defensive possession just weren't really there. And then it triggered Dallas's driving kick game. They were spraying out for threes, or then kick out, someone attacks, closes out wildly, that player attacks, and it's another driving kick. And like, they were just playing, pinging the ball around the floor. And it like, if they weren't just getting straight to the rim or driving and kicking for a three, if the Lakers forced them into a second or third action, Dallas would just keep getting downhill and keep creating good shots. So I thought a lot of credit to Dallas and their game plan. I thought Jason Kidd and his staff did a better job than JJ Redick and his staff tonight. There's really no way around it. I think the AD post up too, Dallas likes to double and play an aggressive style. And I don't think the Lakers really countered it well. And part of it comes down to missing shots too. Like, I thought LA generated a lot of good threes. They got to the free throw line 24 times. They missed a bunch of point blank looks at the rim. Like, that's kind of fluky. It's not something that happens every night, but it's also like that stuff combines and compounds into this type of loss. And you just got to figure, like, there's no excuses. You just got to figure out a way around it. And you do have to counter. And I do think they were either late in their counters or just didn't counter at all enough. And that's why they lost. Or it's a big part of why they lost tonight. Scott Moore, thank you for the super chat. Great show, sir. Thank you. Would you be open to Gabe, JHS, and Hayes for Valanciunas, Champagny, and a first to bring a rebounder, an athlete, and an open roster spot? Well, if the Lakers are getting a first, I am intrigued by this potential trade, especially if they then go at least trade one of the three firsts that they would have in this scenario. Unless you're saying the Lakers put a first in, which I would not do for Valanciunas. It's sure, like I've been on record, I'm not a big Valanciunas guy because of the defense. I think he's a guy that sometimes I think people just focus on the size and not enough on like the mobility. And it's one thing if you're a Walker Kessler and maybe you're not the most mobile guy, but you're 7'1" with whatever wingspan he has, and you're a top 5 rim protector in the league, you can get away with not being the quickest guy defensively. If you're a Robert Williams and who has solid mobility, but is, a pogo stick defensively and can block shots into like the 5th row, that's a different story. But Jonas Valanciunas is a ground-bound big. He's a guy who can be attacked in pick and rolls. He can be attacked in help situations. I think he has a little bit of utility as a post defender and as a defensive rebounder. I think he could have helped, for example, against like Steven Adams. But depending, like, if my one issue or one of my issues would just be like, if that's like the second move and that's really it, I don't think that's enough. Like, you could talk me, sure, is he better than Jackson Hayes? Can he help plug a hole in certain matchups? Yes, but I also think there's some matchups where he'd be unplayable, he'd get targeted, and then the Lakers would kind of be back in the same spot of playing small ball or having to rely on AD too much. So I really think if the Lakers go get another big, I would want someone like a Kessler, like a Williams, who can protect the rim and also potentially play with AD. I'm not as sold on Valanciunas, but if you're getting a first round pick, that does change. I'm more open to it. So I don't think that Washington would do this, especially taking on Gabe's contract, but If just going off of what you are proposing, of course, if you're getting a first in the trade, I think I would do it. Next one from Michael D. I was coming around to Austin being a serviceable defender. Not sure what to think after tonight. Everything the Mavs got started with him getting beat. I think Austin had a bad defensive night, but I don't think like the Lakers could come out and beat Charlotte by 35. And I think we're going to look at everything through a different lens, right? Like I think I try not to be a prisoner of the moment. And with Austin, certainly there are players and teams that can target him and have targeted him. And there are physical limitations ultimately with both his quickness and his ability to take contact on drives. So that is a factor. If you have a team that can target him in that way, like Dallas did tonight, I guess my kind of pushback would just be, I think the Lakers did a bad job as a team. I don't think it wasn't just like it was target Austin and just like dance with him a bit and just shoot threes over him. It was target Austin, get by him, get downhill. And I thought the Lakers did a poor job of helping and rotating, whereas Dallas, on the other hand, did a much better job whenever the Lakers would get downhill and beat their guys. So I don't, well, like, yes, the actual point of attack and him getting beat, like there were a lot of bad possessions, like that. There's really no way around it. I also don't think this is a reflection of Austin on a nightly basis. I think if you take the aggregate of Austin's defensive performances, he's had some really good defensive nights. And I think it bigger guards and wings who have size and athleticism advantages over him and are physical, they can give him problems. But there are going back to even last season, but even parts of this season, I think there's been times he's done really well on the ball and helped funnel guys or keep them in front of him at a good level. So I don't think Austin, this was like arguably his worst defensive game of the season. If you want to hold him to that standard, that's fine. But I don't think that that's the nightly version of Austin we see defensively. Golden Wrench, JHS Wood for Davion Mitchell, Jackson and Gabe for Richards and Cody. Not flashy, but it's realistic and fills our holes. Davion has a 7.6 passer rating and elite defense. JHS and Wood for Davion, that's fine for me, just because JHS is out of the rotation. Wood, it seems to be trending positively, but we haven't gotten a more concrete update with him. Jackson and Gabe for Richards and Cody Martin. I think I would also do. I think Nick Richards is probably the best player in the deal. And then Cody, you're getting a bit bigger on the perimeter and not really like, I think pound for pound, Gabe's a better defender, but you are getting a bit bigger. So I agree with you in that, like, I think there are non-flashy moves that the Lakers could make that fill some holes. I would still try to find the move that's worth the first round pick and really just go for it. But if that move isn't out there, if some of the prices are crazy and they just can't get a guy that they feel is worth it, a couple of moves like this, I would be open to. I just think, again, I don't know how much those three guys move the needle in, like, can they be top 8 guys on a finals team? I have questions about all three of them as top 8 guys on a finals team. And I mean, I guess depending on like the guys you're trading, they don't even necessarily have to be top 8 guys on a finals team. And maybe they're just bolstering that like 9 to 11 range. But I think if you're the Lakers, ideally you're getting you're adding another starting level or like top 7 level player. And I don't know if any of these three guys, like I would say these guys don't qualify for that. Richards is maybe borderline, but in doing a little bit more research on him, looking a bit more into his numbers, they're not as good as I thought they were. So I'm like, he's better than Jackson for sure. But I I don't know how big that gap actually is. I know like statistically he's been much better, but like I guess Richards is maybe the lone needle mover here. Super chat from Ali. Let's stay positive and go all in. We aren't far. I continue to be. I mean, it's hard to be positive, obviously, after tonight, and I know a lot of people are upset, and I've got a lot of passionate super chats tonight. But I think that the last part of this, I don't think the Lakers are that far. I just think that they have to make the right second move, and if they do that, that will position them to go to at least have a shot to have a deep playoff run. Another super chat from Doggy. Dallas put Austin Reeves into isolation 15 times. Literally the entire second half strategy was to take turns to cook Reeves. Yeah. So, I mean, I touched on that earlier. I thought he was better in the second half than the first half, but still was able to be targeted and taken off the dribble. And the one thing I would kind of point to is like, I don't think you want Austin on an island. And that's where I think the team defense was a bit subpar, and they chose like, because if you also look at it, like if you're Dallas and you're targeting someone in that starting lineup, you're not targeting AD, you're not targeting LeBron, you're not targeting Max, and even Rui at least has size, so it makes sense to target Austin. And if DFS is in there for Rui, you're still going to target Austin, right? So I think the two primary guys that they targeted were Austin and Dalton, and I thought they had a lot of success against both of those guys. But I also think if you're the Lakers, at some point you have to adjust to that. Start like when Austin's on the ball, then start doubling and play a more aggressive style, and then rotate out of that, and at least mix it, or go to a zone or so. Like just mix something up, and don't let them continue running the same plays that they're running. And that's kind of just what would happen far too often. Durant Simpson, thank you for the super chat. Jovan, wouldn't Vooch be a better center? He can score. What would it take? Appreciate you. Well, thank you. I mean, yeah, so Vooch is a better center than Jackson Hayes, Christian Wood. Like that's a no-brainer. I think similar to Valanciunas, there are some defensive concerns with Vooch. There's also the contract, whereas Valanciunas is making about $11 million. Vooch is making, I want to say, around 20. So just to get there, it would almost certainly have to be Rui plus something else. And then again, it's like, are you starting Vooch, or is he like your sixth man? But then that's kind of a weird, like, I don't think it's a great fit with him and AD unless you just turn him into solely a spot up shooter. But I think he's more skilled than that. And I don't know if he would fully buy into just being like a pick and pop spot up big. And then again, I come back to the defensive end of, I think he's a guy who could be played off the floor in high stakes situations. So between him and Valanciunas, I actually, in thinking more about it, I lean more toward Vucevic because of the offensive skill and talent. I mean, he's averaging 20 points a game. He's shooting over 40% on threes. Like I understand the offensive value. I just think ultimately I don't love the fit of him and AD together. And if he's like even if you could somehow do like 20 minutes a night with him and only like 6 of those are next to AD, is that worth what the potential cost would be? And I don't know exactly. I've heard different things as to like what Chicago would want for him. I've noted this anytime Chicago is brought up, that they and the Lakers don't have the best relationship exactly. So there's several teams you could say that about, but I think Chicago's low on the list of potential Lakers suitors or trade partners. So that's another thing to take into account. But it would probably have to be like Rui, JHS, and if you could do it for 2 second round picks, like I still don't love it, but maybe the Lakers can talk themselves into it. But I would not give up a first for him, to be clear. Keon Park, Thank you for the super chat. AD motor problem, especially a night off. If this was a playoff knockout game, the Lakers lost because of AD's motor. Dang, trade AD for Giannis. The last part, Milwaukee's not trading Giannis, especially not for AD. My pushback would be, I think AD has a pretty good track record in big games. I think if tonight was a play-in game or a game 7, AD shows up. I do think he was one of the people who kind of took the night off to your point, a bit or for stretches of the game. So especially the finishing, like again, he missed like 5 layups, which just is very uncharacteristic of AD, unless he's kind of going through one of those stretches where he's not playing well, and then he misses layups, he misses free throws, and he doesn't play as well defensively. And I thought that was despite, I mean, it's crazy that he had 21, 12, and 2 blocks, and we're saying he had a bad game, but he had a pretty bad game. And yeah, I mean, but I think to keep perspective, like AD has a pretty good track record in big games. Of course, some of the Denver games, particularly Western Conference Finals, weren't always his best games, but for the most part, AD has a pretty good track record, at least as a Laker. Eeg, thank you for the very generous super chat. Genuinely surprised, no rumors for Ingram/Levine. We know playoff rotation shortened. The depth lost is overstated. Gabe, Rui, Vando gone, and you still have an 8-man rotation. In my opinion, offense is a huge issue. These are real all-stars. I've talked about this before. I would classify Ingram and Levine on different tiers. I think Levine has had a good season, but I think in terms of like what translates more to winning basketball, I think there's a big gap between them defensively, and Ingram's not like, he's kind of just okay okay to below average defensively, but Levine has historically been statistically one of the worst defensive guards in the league, and he's a guy you can pick on. So sure, is he more athletic and explosive than Austin? But is that worth giving up all? Because like Gabe, Rui, Vando gets you to about 39 million. You're still not even at Levine. You got to throw in at least 2 more minimum guys. And then Chicago has to figure, then you potentially have to expand that to a 3-team trade. So that's where Levine just makes so much money that it's just really hard to take on that number. Ingram's a little bit more realistic, because if you do Rui and Gabe, you get to, you're like 7 million under Ingram. So then again, you could do 2 minimum guys, but it's a little bit different. Throwing in I think that the Vando contract would be a wrench in this, because Vando has 3 more years, and that is not perceived as a positive asset. That is perceived as a negative asset. So I think you'd almost have to, with the way Levine's playing and them taking on both Gabe and Vando as longer term money, and Rui, but I think Rui, depending on how they view him, could be viewed as at least like a neutral asset. But Gabe and Vando are negative assets. They're going to ask for at least a pick, if not 2, to take on that type of money. Because why would Chicago have any incentive to take on, yes, they are getting off Levine's contract, and that's off of their books, but I mean, maybe it's just like a pick or something. But I think to throw Vando in would be something that Chicago would not want, and they would turn around and then ask for more assets from the Lakers. Ingram, I've come around to, and I'm a bit more open to his potential fit. I think he's basically a better Rui, and that's like an oversimplification of both of those guys, but just that like scoring forward who certainly, higher ceiling. He's a much better player than Rui, but just in terms of like archetype and how he fits, and he would he would slot in as the third number 3 option and gives you another shot creator, another playmaker. I think defensively, I don't like him, LeBron, and AD. I still don't think is a great defensive front court, but if you have Max or DFS in that like fit spot, you could probably get by. Offensively, it's just, I think you're going to be really, really good. So one other solution here is just potentially adding another bench scorer. And, we talked earlier about like not making the biggest, flashiest moves. Like maybe it's just, is there another bench guy that can be like the seventh or eighth guy that can get you 15 to 20 a night? Not necessarily every night, but if you really need it, he can do that off the bench. And maybe it doesn't cost as much depth as many contracts. Because let's just say they do the Levine trade, right? So now what are you starting? Like you're not moving Austin to the bench. With the way Austin's playing, you just can't move him to the bench. So you're going Austin, Levine, Ruiz, and Vando are gone. So let's say DFS. Now you're moving Max to the bench and LeBron, AD, and then your bench is Max, Dalton, Cam, Jackson, Christian. Like I mean, that's like you're getting the 7 guys, and then one of those guys is Dalton, who has been very up and down lately. So I think there'd be a real depth issue. Jared Madrano, as a journalist, do you feel like teams try to talk through the media to gain leverage, especially in regards to trade talks? Yes, yes, I do. I would say certainly teams, but there's a lot of front office personnel, scouts, but like rival personnel, scouts, agents, players. Like, yeah, everyone's trying to use the media, and that's why part of the media and who will engage in these conversations, the biggest thing is to try and like anything I report, I have double sourced, or I might say I talked to a scout, or I talked to a whatever, and they said this, but I'm clarifying that that's like one person's perspective, one person's opinion. But if I am going to come out and say, I've heard the Lakers have, like when I report, I hear the Lakers are being patient. That's something I'm hearing from multiple sources, and they're not all within the organization. They're not all outside the organization. I think it's important to diversify your sourcing. And when I hear, okay, Jonas Valanciunas is the name that's been linked to them, well, that's actually been months of reporting on that, months of hearing Jonas Valanciunas' name, and again, inside and outside the organization. When I say that, the exception is Valanciunas or Cam Johnson or Dorian Finney-Smith, that's from months and talking to people inside, outside the organization. So the big part of it is trying to just cross-check things and make sure you're not being fed bad information. And there's certain things I hear, especially on the injury front, where I feel like sometimes I'll hear more optimistic things from people around the team. And I'm like, I gotta cross-check this or just, make sure that it's true. And if I can't, then it's usually stuff I will just sit on until maybe the thing happens, and then I can further report on it and have that kind of baseline information. So certainly the media is a big part of the leverage game. And for me, I think there have been times where people have probably earlier in my career been able to get certain information out that I wasn't as experienced with in terms of like how to handle it or how to vet it. But I think now at this point, I have a pretty good understanding of like what's legit, what's not, and when someone's trying to get an agenda across. And again, I think the more sourcing you can have, the better with all this. One more from Angelco. He's on the AD trade. I appreciate the super chats, but why does AD avoid dunking? He should be subbed out whenever he misses finger rolls or layups. I think AD, like from putting on weight and just age and wear and tear, is just not as athletic as he used to be. It's kind of similar to like when, and then as an aside, like sometimes you'll see certain guys are out in transition and they will lay the ball in rather than dunking it, or kind of get up for a dunk, but then just lay it in. And like, I think some guys are just, I think it was, I forgot if it was Kobe or someone else who famously said, like, I only have so many more jumps in me, and I'm trying to save those jumps. I think that there's an element of that with AD. Now, regardless of dunking versus layups, like he missed shots that he should not be missing. I think one thing with AD is he can get knocked off balance, and he can be, I think sometimes, when he gets bumped in the air, that can really throw off his equilibrium and just his finishing. And we like, he's not like LeBron is one of the best finishers through contact we've ever seen. Like, he just has this amazing ability to finish through contact. And that's why when LeBron misses he reacts the way he reacts, because he almost never misses around the rim. And I think with AD, he's a little bit more susceptible to being bumped and kind of thrown off his course. So I agree, like in the general principle of like, if you can dunk, just dunk it. It's easier, and there's no shot of the ball rattling in and out or wildly missing. But I don't think every one of those misses was like a dunk opportunity. And I would also just say he's not as athletic as he used to be. Tony Tong, thank you for the super chat. Can you ask JJ why we default to switching? It is like the more modern style of basketball, and I think that is the way that he prefers to play. They have gone more away from it in drop. And one other note that I found interesting from this game. So Daniel Gafford just got in, which is another key piece for the Mavericks that just got injured. But Dallas was actually -4 with Derek Lively on the floor, and they were +21 with Maxi Kleber on the floor, and he basically only played center tonight. So that difference there was like Dallas, when they went 5 out, they really exploited the Lakers, because then they were able to, especially if bringing Maxi up to screen, it was often AD on him, and then you're bringing AD onto the perimeter away from the basket, and then you swing the ball and you can attack. And that's when they would attack Austin or Dalton or whoever and get downhill, and then AD's away from the rim, and then he can't help. So that's where I think switching with AD, especially, I'm less on board with. And I think that might be my next question to JJ on Thursday ahead of the Charlotte game, is like that calculation of when to switch with AD and when not to, because teams can target him in a way of getting him out of the paint. And then once AD's out of the paint, the drop off from AD to basically any other Laker as a rim protector and rim deterrent is massive. And that was, I think, something, a smart thing Dallas did in terms of moving the chessboard around, bringing AD out, and then really exploiting LA that way. Super chat from Harry Chinani. AD needs to play like he was in the beginning of the season, averaging 30 plus for us to have a chance. Offensively, he doesn't look like himself lately. So I view it as like a seesaw. And I think for AD, when he's doing more, like, he only has so much bandwidth. And ideally, he could be that 30 plus point a night guy and a top 5 defender. But I don't think that's like realistic. And I think what the Lakers kind of figured out was that for him to take on that much of a load offensively, it was affecting his defense a bit. And I think he did have some good stretches early in the season defensively, but I think that progressively went away. And then there was a period there, and JJ and AD have talked about, where his defense slipped, and then JJ had to challenge him. And then during the stretch of now 13 games where they've been a much better defense, that was kind of part of that, but that's also come at a cost of AD's offense. And I think some of the finishing, like the finishing has not been, it's not specific just to tonight. Like AD's finishing has been a problem now for multiple games over the last couple of weeks. So I think that they need to find that to kind of use the seesaw metaphor or analogy, whichever one. I think they got to find the right balance and where that sweet spot is of how can you get AD more involved offensively and get him similar to what he was doing early in the season, but not sap his legs and his energy defensively. Cause I think that's the challenge there. But now if you do go to that, like, that's where trading for a defensive big, that like kind of supports that argument of AD could do more offensively if he has to do less defensively, but he can't do less defensively when you don't trust your backup centers and you play a bunch of small ball and the team is susceptible to offensive rebounds for opponents and second chance points and all that stuff. So they got to figure that out. That might be like the most important thing the rest of the way is like, what's the optimal way to use AD? And again, if you're going to put more on his plate offensively, I don't think it's reasonable to expect him to defend at the same level. And if he slips at all, you got to find a way to make up for that, unless you're just want to lean in on the offensive end and not be as good defensively. But clearly they're leaning more in on the defensive end. And I think that has affected AD in particular with his offensive game. Diving back into the chat, I'm going to go about 5 more minutes. Is this Zacchaeus J? I'm more on board with keeping Christian Wood and not Jackson Hayes. Your thoughts? I'd like to see Christian first before I have an opinion on this. Jackson, I think, had been solid before coming back from injury or before getting injured. Since coming back, I think he's been pretty underwhelming. As I mentioned with Gabe, like when a guy comes back from an injury, I believe in giving them some grace and a little bit of a pass. I think Jackson is now getting to the point where that pass is going to be expiring soon, if not like next game. And I think with the way that Christian, I almost go the way that of the big you haven't mentioned, which is Christian Koloko, who to me, with the progress he's made consistently over the past couple months, and just I think straight up is a better defender than Christian Wood and Jackson Hayes. I wonder if he's ultimately the answer, and the Lakers have to find a way to create a roster spot to convert him from a two-way to the 15-man roster. But in theory, sure, because Christian Wood is a better rim protector statistically than Jackson Hayes, and he has the three-point shot, so you can play him next to LeBron and AD more organically, and those lineups worked pretty well last season. So I guess the theory of Christian Wood, yes, over Jackson Hayes, especially with seeing some of the limitations that Jackson just continues to have, including not being able to just not foul around the rim. I think he's regressed in that specific part of his game. But I mean, at least one of these guys is healthy and available, and is, he just missed a month, but like Jackson's been much more present than Christian, and that's out of Christian's control. But like, I don't want to give up on the healthy guy in hopes of the other guy getting healthy at some point. I want to see him healthy. I want to see how he plays. I want to see how he fits. So ideally, Christian could come back in the next 2 weeks, and we have a better sample size of like what he actually looks like with this group. Richard James, they target AR to switch in 80 as well, so they can exploit and get easier and better chances on getting offensive rebounds, since 80 is usually out of position on the drop coverage. Yes, that's a good point. It also translates to offensive rebounds. Schmidt-K, DFS should start. Fit is just too good. I agree. Jaron Stevenson, Gabe and Rui got to go. That's, I think if you're just doing basic math and basic asset calculation, if the Lakers do make another trade of consequence, it almost certainly has to be one of those two guys. Vando with 3 more years is going to be an unappealing contract. And maybe you could do dumping a minimum guy or trading JHS. But realistically, if it's a trade of substance and consequence, it's going to be Gabe or Rui. And I think the next 3 weeks are going to be important for deciding which one of those two guys makes more sense longer term, which one of those guys is playing better, which one of those guys fits better. And maybe it is both, maybe it's one, maybe it's neither player. But I think those are, if we're looking at like realistic trade candidates, those have to be the top two. And I know I've reported on it. I know Eric Pincus just reported on it, about the Lakers' preference to keep Rui and viewing him as a longer-term piece. So that's certainly a complicating factor here. But I think for the right deal, you got to be willing to move on for him. But for that reason, I probably lean more Gabe as the guy more likely to get traded. But I think it's got to be, it's going to be both in terms of like trade like the most likely guys to be traded, if that makes sense. All right, I just got 2 more super chats, so I will take these 2 and then wrap. First one from Eeg. Great point on AD. More offensive responsibility equals slight fall off on D, which is why Ingram would be great. Question: do you have any insight on where BI left off relationships in LA after his last stint? I do not really have insight into that. A lot of the staff. So I was not covering the Lakers. I actually covered the beginning of BI's tenure, but that was Byron Scott, and then it went Byron Scott, then Luke, and then LeBron came, and I wasn't covering them then. And then basically a lot of the organization has changed from that point, with coaching and training, and a lot of some of the front office is still the same, but like there's been a lot of changes. So a lot of the people currently there do not have relationships with BI from his first tenure. But I think obviously the fan base loves him, and he's probably the favorite baby Laker is probably him or Lonzo, right? I think, if I'm not mistaken. You guys can correct me on that. But it's, I mean, to your point, yeah, I mean, I would just be curious of like how, if Ingram is willing to take on that number 3 role and potentially even I think, the way Austin's playing, I know he had a bad night tonight. We didn't even talk about his offense. Like, I didn't think he was particularly good offensively either. I still think like he's going to have the ball. I don't think you're going to shift him off the ball. I think it's going to be more, maybe a little bit more off the ball, but he's still going to be the primary ball handler, point guard for the starting group at least. And how does Ingram go from being like a top 2 guy on New Orleans to potentially being the number 3 or even number 4 some nights, some matchups in LA? And is he willing to buy in on the defensive end? Because I think they're really going to need him to be at least average defensively, if not better than that. But again, Ingram's grown on me depending on what the ultimate package looks like. Is it a pick? Like it's kind of unclear what exactly they would want. I also think New Orleans is another one that I mentioned. Chicago, I don't know how open New Orleans would be to trading with the Lakers again. Final one from Lowry, 1993, 2 straight games. Rui gets 1 rebound, missed rotations, etc. Time to change the starting lineup. Thanks for all you do, Jovan. I think this is a perfect place to wrap and a perfect way to go full circle because, as I said in takeaway number 2, I think it's time for DFS to start and take Rui's spot. And I know Rui's actually averaging more rebounds over this stretch with DFS than DFS is, but I think there's something to the defensive rotations, boxing out, being more physical in the paint. I think DFS will just kind of hack guys occasionally. And I think there's some value in that, in just breaking up the rhythm of a team, or you take a hard foul and you're going to think twice next time you're in the paint. So I just think he does a bunch of little winning things. And one of the other things is just like offensively, I think he's really found a good rhythm. And tonight only took 4 shots, but hit 3 of them. They were all threes. And I think he just has a very simple role, and he does it very well. And again, I think he does a lot of things that, I mean, this was a guy that I thought the Lakers should have been going after for 2 years. I've been impressed with him as a Laker. I think he's looked progressively better and more comfortable. And just based on the way Rui's currently playing and the ups and downs he's had this season, I think DFS is a better fit, a better player, and a more stable player, which is what I think the Lakers need, as we've seen them kind of fluctuate night to night. So if he can start and play 30 to 32 minutes and Rui comes off the bench and is more in that like 22 to 24 minute range, I think that makes sense for the starters and the bench unit. But that will do it for today's show. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. I'll be back tomorrow with episode 77 of Buha's Block with Jason Timp. So we are going to be going over the Texas trip. We're going to be going over the trade deadline. We're going to be going over DFS and his fit and just sort of the post-trade fallout. Then we're going to be answering some of your mailbag questions, some of the questions that I did my mailbag prompt on the community tab, and going to be taking some of those and answering those to continue. Got a bunch of mailbag questions, so trying to trickle through them throughout the week. But that will do it again. Thank you all so much. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. And for those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back tomorrow. I will talk to you then.